Great. I hope the mic is working and you can hear me at the back. Is it clear? Great, I can see some nods. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this conference on religion and sustainable development, with its focus on building partnerships to end extreme poverty. My name is Matthew Frost. I have been leading Tearfund for the last 10 years in the UK, and I also co-chair the Joint Learning Initiative into Faith and Local Communities. And it really is a privilege to welcome you all to this conference. Before I invite our co-hosts up to give an opening comments and reflections to set the tone for our conference, I'd like to briefly remind us about the three goals that this conference has set itself. These are in your programs, and I'd encourage you to keep reminding you of them as we go through the next 2.5 days. So firstly, we want to connect frontline policymakers, and we want to connect them to knowledge, experience, research, methods, and expert relationships that are very much grounded in frontline practice. And this is, again, the goal of this is to support more effective partnerships across both public sector and faith sectors, again, with the common cause of ending extreme poverty. That's the first goal. The second goal is to develop very specific recommendations for action to strengthen our partnerships between public sector and faith sectors. And the third is, we would like to, as much as possible, from those of us gathered here today, reflecting our leadership positions in varieties of organizations and networks, to gain our collective commitments to follow on activities to make these recommendations real, recognizing it is this gathered group of people who have probably the greatest influence and interest in taking forward this agenda. So those are the goals. They're in our conference agenda. Keep reminding yourself of them and helping us to really focus on them through the next 2.5 days. This is very much a working conference. It's with a singular focus, as I said, on developing realistic, gritty, practical recommendations that we can take forward to build more effective partnerships. I just want to thank you all for being here today and for the interest you have in this topic. I'd also just like to underscore that we do regret that numbers have been constrained over the next coming 2 days, on Wednesday and Thursday. They have been constrained by the nature of the working groups, and so we have had to limit numbers to some degree. But everything that will be happening during the course of the conference, by way of recommendations, by way of proceedings, documents, recommendations, all of these things will be posted on the Joint Learning Initiative into Faith and Local Community website, probably, hopefully, within a week or so, a couple of weeks of the conference happening. So everything will be available. Now, I'd just like to introduce to you our panel, our co-hosts. And we have 7 co-hosts without which this conference would not have been possible. Huge thanks to all of the co-hosts. And we have 7 representatives from our co-hosts, and they're each going to share some opening reflections I've requested them strictly 3 minutes. We'll see how they get on. I have been given very clear instructions not to get into the habit of getting out of time. So we've got to try and start in the way we intend to carry on, folks. So please don't let me down, okay? So I'm going to introduce you. So from the far end, Mark Brinkmoeller, who is with USAID. Then next to Mark is Charles, I hope I'm going to get your name right, Charles Owubah, I think, with World Vision International. Then next we have Azza Karam, who joins from UNFPA. Then we have Andreas Hipple from GHR. I apologize, it's the first time I've met some of you, so forgive me if I'm not getting your name quite right. Then we have Phil Stevens, who will be representing DFID from the UK. Then we have Mauthe-Kaeter from the German government, and then we have Adam Taylor, who's from the World Bank Group. So I'm going to invite them each now to come up and just share 3 minutes on their opening reflections to help set the tone for the conference. So Adam, and just as Adam comes up, I just want to pay a special thanks to the World Bank for hosting us so splendidly so far. So Adam, over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. Clearly, Matthew does believe in miracles by giving us each 3 minutes, but we are going to do our best. And it is such a joy to see this extraordinary group of leaders from the faith sector broadly, from public development institutions, and from academia. And you've all come together to really join a very practical conference, hopefully also an inspirational conference, as we try to find solutions together on how to strengthen more effective partnerships. I have the privilege of leading the Faith Initiative here at the bank. I want to thank Jill Wilkins, who is here. She leads our global engagement team and has been very supportive of this effort. This initiative is just a year and a half old, and it builds on a great deal of work that Catherine Marshall and others conducted in the bank to try to increase dialogue and partnerships between the bank and faith-inspired institutions. We have a commitment to increasing dialogue, operational collaboration, and strengthening the evidence base around the role and contribution of faith actors to improving development outcomes. And I'm grateful because this conference gives us a reason to fulfill all 3 of those goals at once. And so you're really helping us to advance many of the goals of the Faith Initiative. As Matthew mentioned, this conference was only made possible because of a great deal of teamwork. It's sometimes more complicated when we have multiple organizations and agencies working together to create a conference. But I actually think it has created a richer agenda, and we're excited for that. I also really want to thank the Joint Learning Initiative and Gene Duff for all of their leadership and work with us in making this possible. The timing of this conference is very fortuitous, in part because of the Lancet series that is about to be launched, and we'll hear much more about that in just a few minutes. But also because this is a seminal year where the world is debating what's going to replace the Millennium Development Goals, as many of you know. There's a Financing for Development conference that's going to be in Addis next week, and then the UN General Assembly in September, where the new Sustainable Development Goals will be discussed and agreed to. And I think this discussion fits into that very critically because the success of the SDGs hinges in part on how we find more innovative and creative ways of working together across sectors. I think it's important to acknowledge that our institutions do work differently and are at different points in this journey of figuring out how to more effectively work with faith actors. That being said, though, there's a lot that we can learn from each other, and I'm looking forward from the bank's perspective to learn a great deal from my other colleagues. It feels like the pendulum has shifted significantly across our institutions, though, where it's becoming a new normal for us to want to engage more effectively with faith institutions. It's becoming the norm rather than the exception, but still a great more work needs to be done. I just want to close by focusing on 3 particular metrics within the bank that I think we can use to measure some of our progress in strengthening effective partnerships. The first is around the degree to which we are engaging more effectively with faith actors as a critical part of our operating and enabling environment. The second is around the degree to which we are exchanging knowledge and in many cases trying to bring faith organizations on as implementing partners. There are some examples of that already that we'll point to during the next couple of days, including through results-based financing for health programs, the Nigerian Interfaith Action work in Nigeria to combat malaria, and IMA World Health's efforts to strengthen health systems in South Sudan are just a few that I'd point to right now that we can discuss in greater length. And the third metric is around, it might be the hardest to measure, but is very important, which is the degree to which the bank has a more faith-sensitive lens, is more astute about the impact and contribution and role of faith in development. We're in the process of developing a resource guide that is trying to develop tools and knowledge and case studies that can help banks develop a more faith-sensitive lens that we can apply to development. This conference will get very technical, and that's a good thing. Hopefully, we'll also become very action-oriented. But I think it's very important that we also keep our sights set on what unites us, some of our shared values and our shared commitment to the goal of ending extreme poverty by the year 2030. And I just want to close my comments by reading a portion of a statement that many religious leaders, many in this room, helped come together to create, called a moral and spiritual imperative to end extreme poverty, because I think it captures the essence of what this partnership can be all about. They write and they commit together that ending extreme poverty will require a comprehensive approach that tackles its underlying causes, including preventable illness, a lack of access to education, joblessness, corruption, violent conflicts, and discrimination against women, ethnic minorities, and other groups. But it'll also necessitate a change in the habits that cause poverty, greed and waste, numbness to the pain of others, and exploitation of people in the national world. It calls for a holistic and sustainable approach that transforms cultures and institutions, hearts as well as minds. I hope that kind of commitment can permeate our time together. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam, thank you very much. Martin, do you want to come up? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Before we get too technical, I just want to give you an impression and idea why Germany, why the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development is dealing with this issue of religion and development. Because to be honest, sometimes within my ministry, I'm asked, why are you dealing with this issue? Why are you talking about religion, and why are you talking to religious actors as a secular organization? And I think here is why. Because when we want to make this world a better place, and when we want to make it more healthier, when we want to end poverty, extreme poverty, then we need two things. I think first we need a paradigm shift towards sustainability. And second, we need a new global cooperation, a new global partnership. And this is what the SDGs and the post-2020 agenda is all about. And what we learned, and I think this is very clear to all of us, is that these goals can't be achieved by governments alone. So we need these actors who have an influence on people's values, on people's minds, on their behavior. And this can't be just government. This has to be also religious actors, the faith community. And this is why we at Germany, we started this debate on how we can systematically incorporate the potential of religion into our development strategies. And what we discussed so far is that wherever we can achieve more by cooperating with faith communities, we should cooperate. And wherever religion is part of a problem, and sometimes religion is part of a problem, it also has to be part of the solution. And that is why we really appreciate having this conference here. And it was 1 year ago when World Bank President Kim was in Berlin and met our minister, and we bring them together with religious leaders to talk about religion and development. And so it's great to be here and to have this joint conference. And not only sending a signal that religion matters, I think this is one important thing. We have to send a signal religion matters. But here at this conference, we should also ask, how does religion matter? And how does it matter effectively? So I thank also Jean and Adam in particular for bringing this conference. I'm looking forward to have interesting conversations with you and finding concrete approaches how we can incorporate the potential of religion for development. And let me say this very clearly from a German perspective, unless we make religious leaders and the faith community part of this new global partnership, the new SDGs, the new post-2020 agenda will not be a successful agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Martin, thank you very much. Phil Stevens representing DFID. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Matthew. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for inviting me to come along and say a few words at the opening of this fascinating conference. I'm currently based here in DC, still working for DFID, but at the World Bank. And I've spent most of the last 6 or 7 years working in Africa, in Malawi and DRC for DFID. Our government recognises that religion is crucially important in development, not least because most people in developing countries engage in some kind of spiritual practice. Their faith is important to them, and it enables them to relate to the world. DFID recognises that faith groups too make a hugely important contribution to poverty reduction, and we've always worked with faith groups, including Christian Aid, Islamic Relief, CAFOD, and many others. When I was working in DRC for DFID, I was actually involved in one of the largest grants that DFID's ever given to a faith-based organisation, which was to IMA, providing health services to around 6 million people in DRC. So we know that faith groups have a distinctive role to play in development compared to many other civil society actors. They bring different values and beliefs to the table, and they have a greater level of trust and legitimacy in the eyes of many citizens. They can reach marginalised people that are often untouched by secular institutions. So that's all great. But as many of you know far too well, things are not always perfect. Donors and faith groups have not always been working closely together. Sometimes they've been estranged from each other. 10 years ago, Alistair Campbell, who's an advisor to our Prime Minister Tony Blair, famously said that governments don't do God. And in line with that perspective, many governments and donors have sometimes seen religion as a barrier to development, or at least something that's too contentious to engage with. There's sometimes been a deep reluctance to be associated with any form of proselytizing and a fear of favouring one faith group over another one. So as a result, the issue of faith and religion has often been ignored in the international development policy, in practice and in research. And I think faith groups have often felt shut out by development agencies, or at least been under the impression that they have to leave their faith at the door if they want to come in. But hopefully, as colleagues have been saying, things are changing. And a few years ago, as part of our efforts in the UK to strengthen collaboration between DFID and faith groups, we established a working group to develop our Faith Partnership Principles paper. Many of you will have read this, but just quickly, this highlights that we need to firstly build a common understanding of the role that faith and religion play in development in different contexts. Secondly, that we need to develop more systematic evidence on the impact that faith groups make and their distinctive contribution to development. And thirdly, that we need to create an open and frank forum for debate. My hope, and if it's not too tacky, I would say my prayer for this conference is that it provides the space to do exactly that. This is an opportunity for you, the experts on this, to consider how development agencies like ours, DFID, can strengthen our collaboration with faith groups. And I'm really looking forward to having the opportunity to engage with you in some of the sessions over the next couple of days, along with my DFID colleagues, Gwen Hines and Dave Beer, who will also be participating in some of the sessions. And I look forward to seeing some of the really specific, I think Matthew said gritty, and actionable recommendations that allow us to build a better partnership together so that we can work more effectively to end extreme poverty together. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really hoping that word gritty becomes a sort of defining thing of this, this conference. So Andreas Hipple representing the GHR Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you everyone for being here. GHR Foundation is a private family foundation that's been quietly making grants on faith-based issues for over 50 years now. We've seen aid money going to Western faith-based aid agencies, but haven't seen enough of three important things over this time. First, we haven't really seen a meaningful connection between the security sector, development, and peace-building communities, and that's one of the areas that we're focused on. Second, we haven't seen enough smart ways to measure impact in ways that also engage and respect faith communities. Third, we haven't seen enough real engagement with faith communities on the ground. GHR is funding work to address these issues. We invest in interreligious action because we know it produces better aid outcomes and builds social connections that can advance more peaceful societies. We do that primarily in two areas. First, health. We've seen an improved impact of work through funding interreligious work on malaria through the Nigerian Interfaith Action Association, who you'll hear from Bishop Sunday later this week. Second, we also focus on children. We've supported work on early marriage and child trafficking and seen significant impact there, thanks to working with faith groups. We also have a program that works to provide better family care for orphans and vulnerable children. We know faith groups are already at the center of this work here and around the world. And while their intentions have been good, in too many cases, orphanages that are nominally faith-based actually damage the minds and souls of children. And so some of our work seeks to address that. Our interest in co-hosting this forum is, to use the word that both Martin and Phil used, in partnership. We're looking to connect with new partners. We're not the biggest donor by any measure, but we punch above our weight through partnership. We can add that nimble layer of funding that's often needed by governments or larger donors who want to bring creative solutions for greater impact. I argue that the case for the role of religion in sustainable development has largely been made. It's hard to dispute it now. We're arguing around implementation, around how to scale up, and how to proceed in actually advancing the real action-oriented elements of that role. So GHR is focused on what comes next. We want to turn this talk into action, and we hope through this conference and significant follow-up work to identify key partners with whom we can collaborate, and hope that all of you in the next 2 days will be finding new partners with whom to collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you. Andreas, thank you very much. That is so far the record, so that was just over 2 minutes, and I thank you for that, Andreas, for getting us back on time. I'd like to welcome Azza up, representing both UNFPA and the UN Interagency Task Force.
Great. All right, it's a great honor and privilege and pleasure to be here and to notice how many familiar faces and familial faces there are around the room. So thank you for the opportunity of making this possible, Adam and Jean. Adam from the World Bank Group and Jean from the Joint Learning Initiative. It takes a heck of a lot of work, and y'all did a remarkable job. Thank you for all of you for coming. I have a couple of lessons that I wanted to share with you. In 2000, a number of religious leaders, over 100 of them, gathered in the General Assembly at the United Nations. And it was the first ever gathering of religious leaders in the UN. You'd think it should have happened some time ago, but 2000. We had, I'm not sure how many, but it was definitely over 150. And it was an incredibly humbling experience that we learned a number of different lessons from. And I want to share them with you. I'm not going to share them all. I'm just going to share a couple, because I hope that they will be able to reinforce the messages that you've heard from the colleagues here, but also that we will keep them in our mind as we go forward. We learned that the UN, and as a multilateral intergovernmental system, is actually the new kid on the development block. That the work of development has always been done by religious communities and religious institutions. So we think we do development, we've got a lot to learn. And we've got a lot to learn from the faith-based world. We've also learned that this idea of partnership and engagement between religious organizations or religious communities and secular ones is one of the oldest ideas in the book too. And we realized that there were incredible leaders out there, male and female, from secular and religious or faith-based, who have been addressing some of these issues for the longest possible time. And I don't think it's possible to talk about the engagement at a multilateral level without giving thanks to, in so many ways, as Adam has very kindly done, to somebody like Catherine Marshall, who has been a guru for all of us in the system for the longest time. But I also want to point out the fact that we have a number of women who have been leading this work in their respective agencies. Liza from UNICEF, Sally from UNAIDS. Why is it that women have been leading some of this work? We've got Jean from the Joint Learning Initiative. There's a number of women who are very passionate about this area of engagement between Bonnie Dougal from the Baha'i International Community and many of you whose names I probably won't know, but I just wanted to point out, we tend to think that religion is usually not very kind to women, and yet it has been women who have been pioneering some of this work for the longest time. And I hope we will not forget that in the next few days as we look at the partnership work and as we look at the question of gender, that we will tackle it seriously, because it is fundamental to bringing the issues of faith to the fore in the multilateral system. It has taken a number of very committed activists who were women to do this. So I hope we will keep that in mind. And the last lesson that I learned that I hope we will be able to also keep in mind is we are usually gathered in Western hemispheres to talk about the work that is being pioneered and done by a lot of non-Western people in non-Western countries. And I hope that we can keep that humility in mind too, that we have plenty to learn as we sit here from those of you who have been working in your own contexts elsewhere, and that's precisely how we'll move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Azza. Thank you. Let me invite Charles Owubah, representing World Vision. Thank you.
So at World Vision, I oversee evidence and learning, so my comments will come from that angle. If it is true that 8 in 10 people in the world today claim to be people of faith, if it is true that 95% of the people living in the world's poorest countries claim that faith is important in their lives, then it is not a matter of asking the question whether faith should be part of development. What that means is that we have to make sure that faith is part and parcel of programming, because there's value in doing so. Here's an example. So between 2007 and 2011, World Vision, with the support of USAID, began a family planning program in Senegal, Haiti, and India. We did two things. The first thing we did was to change the argument from overpopulation to that of health benefits. Benefit to the infant, benefit to the child, benefit to the mother, particularly when it comes to reduction in maternal mortality. In Senegal, we worked closely with faith leaders, imams, and you know Senegal, very conservative, predominantly Muslim. By working with the imams became advocates for family planning, and they were preaching about them in the mosque during the Sunday as Friday worship. Yes, they did so. Now, within a matter of 2 years, we saw significant change in the population. We saw a 4% increase in the uptake of contraceptive ideas within Senegal, and this is in the general population. In one particular health clinic, we saw an 8% increase in the uptake of those ideas, because there's value in making sure we have faith leaders as part and parcel of programming. Now, here's the challenge. And that's why in the next 2 days, I'm hoping that we can bring our thoughts and ideas together to make sure it becomes possible for us to be able to bring this challenge and solve this challenge. The challenge is about making sure that we can employ appropriate methodologies to capture these experiences that is taking place all over the world, bring it to the fore so that we can learn from it, and so that as we go forward, we can ensure that faith is actually part and parcel of what we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles. And finally, Mark Brinkmoeller from USAID.
So what can be left to say? I'm happy to be the one to say whatever doesn't need to be said anymore. But a couple reflections. First, it is exciting to be here with the people who are in the room. And I hope we can convey a bit of energy when we engage over the next few days and this evening yet. USAID's newly minted or relatively newly minted mission statement begins with, we partner to end extreme poverty, build resilience, and do a number of other things. And I really think this conference that we're gathered around today and over the next couple of days, at its core is about partnering. USAID has partnered with faith-based groups since its inception 53 years ago in the Kennedy administration. We have done so well, and we have done so not so well in our history. But I would argue that partnering with the faith community is at now a critical time because of the challenges we face in terms of conflicts, disasters that are driving humanitarian and other needs and often getting in the way of development, as well as the audacious goals in which we've set, ending extreme poverty in a set number of years. If we look around the world for allies to do this, how can we not find the faith community? I would also suggest this is a key moment to engage this because the nature of development assistance, the kind that USAID provides and many of my colleagues provide, is changing. The role of the private sector, the role of diaspora communities around the world in remittances is bringing huge changes, and the money we provided 50 years ago does not play the same role that USAID provides now. We're more catalyst and instigator than solver of huge problems by ourselves. And the faith community touches those. Are we thinking enough of private sector leaders who are motivated by their faith and will never put a religious icon in anything they do, but comes from their heart and their spiritual beliefs? Do we think enough about that? Do we think about engaging the diaspora to be part of the solution in ending extreme poverty and addressing needs, as much as we think of them sometimes as the group that may be pestering us a little bit too much in our given homelands. As I said, the religious community strikes all those areas. I would hope for this conference, at the end of all the grittiness and all the technical work, what really comes out of this is, again, to touch on partnerships, a new set of relationships. And we in government can be hyper transactional, and the religious community can also be hyper relational. And hopefully during these days we can meet together around that, and we can set a course and find a way to build new partnerships that are effective in ending extreme poverty and in bringing the conflicts and challenges which we face to successful conclusions. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Mark. Great, thank you. Thank you all so much for your insights. We've heard a lot already. We've heard that this is a pervasive issue. It's a crucial issue. We've heard that there's an urgent need to really get into this issue as we are these 2 days. We've heard that the timing is right for this conversation. We've heard about some real challenges that have been named that we've got to face into. We've already had some great ideas about what we could do about that. We've also said that there's a lot of great thinking and action that we can build on. And you've all said, I think, partnership is absolutely key to the way forward. So those are all themes we'll be looking at as we move forward. Thank you again for the essential role all of your organizations have played in this conference. Just briefly, I also just want to thank the co-sponsors of the event. Just name them and recognize the crucial role they've played. So the Catholic Medical Mission Board, Catholic Relief Services, Islamic Relief USA, Tearfund, World Vision International, and American Jewish World Service. And I'd also just like to name IMA, World Health, and McKinsey and Company, who've provided substantial in-kind support and services to the conference, and the organizers are really grateful for that. I'd also just like to say thanks to all of my colleagues, and there's many of you here. I'd just like to thank all of you on the Joint Learning Initiative and Faith and Local Communities for the crucial role you've played in actually organizing this event. Right, can we just clap as the panel step down? And as they do so, thank you.